The night I unlocked my front door for my niece, I truly believed I was opening my home to family, not quietly handing over my life. I was 72 then, my hands already spotted with age, my knees stiff enough to predict the weather better than the radio. The house had been too quiet since my husband, Harold, passed away 3 winters earlier. Silence has a way of crawling into corners, settling into furniture, whispering doubts when you least expect it. So when my sister's daughter Lila called me crying about losing her apartment, her voice thin and trembling through the phone, something soft broke open inside me. "Just for a while, Aunt Ruth," she said, "until I get back on my feet." I remember standing in my kitchen, the smell of boiled potatoes still lingering in the air, nodding as if she could see me. Family helps family. That's what my mother taught us, back when the world felt simpler and people meant what they said. When Lila arrived with 2 suitcases and a forced smile, she hugged me a second too long, her arms tight around my shoulders like she was holding on to something she didn't want to let go of. She looked thinner than I remembered. Her hair dyed a glossy black that caught the light, her eyes sharp and restless. Still, I told myself, hardship can change people. I showed her the spare bedroom, the one I'd kept exactly the same since my niece Clara visited years ago. Floral curtains, a quilt I stitched by hand. Lila smiled politely, but I noticed the way her eyes skimmed the room, measuring it, not admiring it. "You don't have to stay in there forever," I joked softly. "We'll make it comfortable." "Oh, I'm sure we will," she said, her smile stretching just a bit too wide. At first she was sweetness itself. She cooked dinners nothing fancy, but enough to make me feel cared for. She insisted on carrying my laundry basket, scolded me gently for climbing on stools to reach the top shelves. "You shouldn't do that at your age," she said, as if age were a fragile thing I might shatter if handled wrong. I told myself I was lucky. Lonely women don't often get second chances at companionship. But little things began to change, so quietly I barely noticed. One afternoon, I came back from my weekly church luncheon and found the living room rearranged. My armchair, the one Harold used to nap in, had been pushed against the wall, replaced by a sleek chair Lila must have brought in while I was gone. "It opens up the space," she said when she saw my face. It was so cluttered before. Cluttered. The word echoed in my chest. That chair held years of whispered conversations, grief, and comfort. I sat in it every evening, my hands folded, remembering, but I smiled and nodded, because making a fuss felt childish. Then came the comments. "You should really stop driving," she said one morning, pouring herself coffee in my favorite mug. "It's not safe." "I've never had an accident," I replied. "Still," she said lightly, "people talk. People talk." Those words stayed with me. Who were these people? And why did it feel like she was already speaking for me? She started answering my phone, paying my bills online, to help. She suggested I let her handle my bank visits, my grocery lists, my appointments. I told myself it was kindness. That's what predators depend on, our willingness to call danger by a gentler name. One evening, as I stood in the hallway, I heard my own name spoken in a voice that wasn't mine. "She's confused sometimes," Lila was saying on the phone. "Forgets things. I worry about her living alone. I pressed my hand to the wall, my heart knocking against my ribs like it wanted out. Confused? I waited until she hung up, then asked, as calmly as I could, "Who were you talking to?" "Oh, just a friend," she said quickly. "About you. About me." As if I were a subject, not a person. "The next Sunday, Mrs." Hargreave from church patted my hand and said, "It's so good you have someone young taking care of you now." I smiled, but my stomach twisted. I hadn't told anyone I needed taking care of. That night I lay awake, listening to Leela's footsteps pacing softly in the living room long after midnight. I told myself it was stress, or youth, or restlessness. But deep down, something old and instinctual stirred inside me, the same feeling I'd had decades ago, when I realized a man I trusted was lying to my face. I stared at the ceiling and thought of the way Lila looked at my house, not as shelter, but as something to be claimed. And for the first time since inviting her in, I wondered if I was still a guest in my own home. By the second month, my name no longer felt like it belonged to me. It was still written neatly on envelopes and church rosters, but inside my own home it was spoken differently, softened, corrected, reshaped. "Aunt Ruth forgot," Lila would say, or "she gets tired easily," or worse, "she doesn't really understand these things anymore." And every time she said it, something inside me shrank, as if I were slowly being folded into a smaller version of myself without my permission. I began to notice how often she corrected me in front of others. When neighbors stopped by, she hovered nearby, finishing my sentences, laughing gently whenever I paused too long. I saw their eyes shift just slightly from mine to hers, trust migrating, quietly, like a bird finding a warmer place to land. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it. Old women imagine insults where none exist. That's what we're taught to believe, that our instincts expire along with our youth. But the house itself began to feel different. My bedroom door, once always open, was often closed now. Lila said it was for my privacy, yet she'd knock only after already turning the handle. Drawers were rearranged, papers moved. Once, I couldn't find the small tin box where I kept Harold's letters, the ones he wrote during his business trips, back when we were still learning how to miss each other. I asked Lila if she'd seen it. "Oh, that old thing," she said. "I put it somewhere safe. You don't need to dwell on the past so much." Need, such a sharp little word, as if my memories were indulgences to be rationed. Then came the mail. One afternoon, I found an envelope already opened on the kitchen counter bank letterhead. My hands shook as I read it. A notice about account activity. Changes I didn't remember making. "I took care of it," Lila said casually from the doorway. "It was getting complicated for you." "For me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yes, you get overwhelmed." I wanted to scream that I had raised 2 children, buried a husband, survived wars and winters and years of silence, that my mind was still my own. But the words tangled in my throat, heavy with fear. Fear of sounding exactly how she'd already painted me. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow, the way women of my generation learned to do silently, so no one would accuse us of being dramatic. The breaking point came with my face. I stood in the bathroom one morning, staring at the mirror, when Lila appeared behind me. "You should let me book you a haircut," she said. "Something simpler. That style makes you look older." I laughed bitterly. "I am old." "Yes, but you don't have to look it," she replied, placing her hands on my shoulders. Her grip was firm, possessive. People judge, people again. Always people. Never herself. Later that week, I overheard her talking to my son, Daniel, on the phone. I hadn't meant to listen, but when you hear your own life being summarized without your consent, it's hard to walk away. "She's not doing well," Lila said, her voice coated in concern. "I'm really worried. She forgets things, gets emotional. I don't think she should be alone." I stepped into the doorway. "I'm not alone," I said quietly. "I'm right here." She jumped, hand flying to her chest. "Oh, you scared me." Funny, because I was the one terrified. Daniel came over the next day. He hugged me, but his eyes searched my face in a way that made me feel examined, evaluated. Lila hovered beside him, nodding sympathetically as he spoke. "Mom," he said gently, "maybe it wouldn't hurt to let Lila help more, just in case. Just in case." Those words carry the weight of a coffin lid. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my small desk and pulled out an old notebook, the one I'd used after Harold died. Inside, I began to write dates, conversations, things moved, things said. I didn't know why, only that something inside me was screaming not to forget, because forgetting was exactly what Lila needed. A few days later, she brought home paperwork. "Just something to make things easier," she said, sliding the folder toward me. "Power of attorney. Temporary things have a habit of becoming permanent." I didn't sign it. For the first time, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You're being difficult," she said. "This is for your own good." "No," I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "It's for yours." The air between us hardened. Something polite cracked, revealing something cold underneath. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time since moving into this house 46 years ago. And as I lay there, listening to Lila's footsteps pause outside my door just long enough to be noticed, I understood something with terrible clarity. She wasn't just helping anymore, she was preparing. And I had a sinking feeling that if I didn't act soon, I wouldn't just lose my home, I would lose my name, my voice, and the proof that I had ever been myself at all. I began to pretend I was weaker than I was. That was the hardest part, shrinking myself on purpose, letting my shoulders slump, letting my hands tremble just a little more than usual. I let Lila believe her story was working, because there is power in being underestimated, and women my age know that better than anyone. We survive by watching quietly while others reveal themselves. I stopped arguing. When she corrected me, I smiled. When she rearranged my things, I thanked her. I even let her cancel my bridge nights at the community center, telling my friends I was tired. What I really was alert, listening, waiting, and writing. Every night after she went to bed, I added to my notebook times, words, expressions on her face. I noted how she'd begun using my bathroom instead of hers, how my clothes seemed to disappear and reappear, folded differently, as if she were trying me on without my body. I noticed how she introduced herself on the phone. "Yes, this is Ruth's niece. I live here. I take care of her. Not helping, taking care." The phrase made my skin crawl. One afternoon, while she was out running errands, I searched her room. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure the house could hear it. I told myself I was wrong for doing it, that I was becoming paranoid, just like she wanted everyone to believe. But the moment I opened her suitcase at the back of the closet, my doubt dissolved. Inside were copies of my documents, my birth certificate, my marriage license, even Harold's death certificate, neatly organized, highlighted. At the bottom of the pile was a printed email. Subject line: "Next steps for property transfer." I sat on the edge of the bed, the room tilting slightly, as if the floor had decided it no longer wished to be beneath me. She had been planning this long before she ever stepped foot in my house. The crying phone call, the desperation, the timing. It wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. That evening, I asked her casually, "Do you miss your mother?" She looked surprised. "Why?" "I was just thinking about family," I said. "Your mother and we were close once." Her jaw tightened, just for a moment. "You always thought you were better than her," she said flatly. There it was, the crack, the truth slipping through. "I never thought that," I replied. "You had everything," she snapped, then caught herself, smiled. "I mean, no. You worked hard. Worked hard." As if life had simply handed me this house, this stability, this history. Later that night, I overheard her again, whispering on the phone. But this time, I recorded it. "The lawyer says it won't be difficult," she murmured. "She's already isolated. Her son trusts me. I just need her signature, or a declaration of incapacity." Declaration. The word felt like a death sentence, written in ink. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat at the kitchen table, watching the moonlight slide across the floor, remembering my sister's face all those years ago, resentful, tired, convinced the world owed her something it never gave. Lila wasn't inventing this hunger. She'd inherited it. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I called my old friend Margaret, the one Lila had insisted I didn't need to see anymore. Margaret answered on the first ring. "Ruth," she said, "are you all right?" "No," I said honestly, "but I will be." Within days, things began to shift. Margaret helped me contact a lawyer quietly. I updated my will, revoked permissions I hadn't even realized were in place. I scheduled a full cognitive evaluation with my doctor and made sure the results were documented thoroughly. Sound mind, clear judgment, no confusion. I also did something else. I invited people back into my life. Church friends, neighbors, my bridge group, the house filled with voices again, laughter echoing through rooms Lila had tried to hollow out. I watched her smile stiffen as control slipped through her fingers. She confronted me one evening, her mask finally gone. "You're doing this on purpose," she hissed. "You're trying to make me look bad." "I'm just living," I said calmly, "in my own home." "You don't need all this space," she snapped. "You don't even use half of it. The words hung in the air between us. That's when I understood the final truth. She didn't want to help me live here. She wanted me gone. That night, I slept with my bedroom door open, not because I felt safe, but because I was no longer afraid. Because the moment someone tries to erase you, the most dangerous thing you can do is prove you still exist. And I was done being quiet. The morning Lila tried to break me. She did it with a smile and a cup of tea. She set it down in front of me like a peace offering, porcelain clinking softly against the saucer. Chamomile, honey, just the way I liked it. That should have been my first warning. When someone studies your comforts too closely, they're usually planning how to use them against you. "I've been thinking," she said, sitting across from me, folding her hands the way doctors do before delivering bad news. "You've seemed overwhelmed lately." I lifted the cup but didn't drink. I let the steam fog my glasses, buying myself a moment. "Oh," I said, "yes. Emotional. Forgetful." She sighed, heavy and rehearsed. "I know you don't like hearing it, but I'm worried about you." I watched her face as she spoke. The confidence, the certainty. She believed this moment belonged to her. "I spoke to a specialist," she continued, "just to ask questions. They said early intervention is important before things get worse." "Things?" I asked quietly. She reached across the table and touched my hand. Her fingers were cold. "Before you hurt yourself, or someone else." There it was, the final stroke of the brush, the picture she was painting of me, frail, unstable, unsafe. I pulled my hand away. "That's quite a story," I said. Her smile faltered. "It's not a story. It's reality." "Is it?" I asked. She stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. "You're doing it again," she snapped. "Twisting things, acting confused." I felt something steady settle into my chest, a calm I hadn't felt since Harold was alive. "Lila," I said evenly, "you've been very busy in my absence." Her eyes flicked just once toward the hallway. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do," she laughed sharply. "You're imagining things." "That's exactly what I've been saying." I looked at her then, really looked, at the impatience leaking through her posture, at the hunger she could no longer disguise. "You went through my papers," I said. "You copied my documents. You spoke to lawyers about transferring my property. You told my son I was losing my mind." Her face went pale. "You searched my room," she whispered. "That's a violation." "No," I said. "This is my house." She stepped back as if struck. "I was helping," she said, but her voice shook now. "You're old, Ruth. You don't see what everyone else sees." "And what is that?" I asked. "That you're alone," she snapped. "That no one would notice if I stepped in. If I took over." The words spilled out of her like poison, finally uncorked. "I deserve this place," she continued, tears springing to her eyes, not of sadness but rage. "You've had everything. Love, security, a home. I grew up watching my mother struggle while you sat here playing gracious aunt." I nodded slowly. "So this was never about helping me. It was about fairness." she said bitterly. No, I corrected softly. It was about entitlement. She turned away, pacing. You can't prove anything. That was when I stood. I don't need to, I said. She froze. I already did. I walked to the sideboard and opened a drawer, pulling out a slim folder. Inside were copies of my medical evaluations, notarized statements, recordings, timestamps clear, voices unmistakable. Her breathing quickened. You recorded me? She whispered. Yes, I said. And I documented everything? I also spoke to a lawyer and Adult Protective Services and my doctor and my son. Her face twisted. Daniel believes you. He does now, I said gently, especially after hearing your voice. She lunged toward the folder, but I stepped back. Pack your things, I said. You'll be leaving today. You can't do this, she cried. I have nowhere to go. I met her gaze. That was never my responsibility. She collapsed into a chair, sobbing now, but even then I noticed how quickly she checked my face, measuring whether the tears were working. They weren't. Daniel arrived an hour later. He listened. He looked at Lila not as a caretaker, but as someone he no longer recognized. When she tried to speak, he raised a hand. Enough, he said. For the first time since she arrived, Lila had no one speaking for her. She left before sunset, suitcases dragging across the porch like punctuation at the end of a sentence. That night, the house felt different again. Not quiet, but settled, as if it had been holding its breath and could finally exhale. I walked through every room, touching walls, furniture, door frames, claiming myself back. But even as relief washed over me, I knew this wasn't the end, because betrayal doesn't leave quietly. It waits. And the final twist was still coming, one that would force me to confront not just what Lila tried to take from me, but what my family had been willing to believe. The days after Lila left felt like walking through a house after a storm, nothing broken beyond repair, but everything shifted just enough to remind you how close you came to losing it all. At first, people were gentle with me, too gentle. They brought casseroles I didn't ask for, spoke in careful tones, watched my face as if checking for cracks. Even Daniel hovered, his concern heavy with guilt. He apologized more than once, his voice thick when he admitted he'd believed her longer than he should have. I just didn't want to think someone would do that to you, he said. I wanted to tell him that was exactly how people like Leela survive, by hiding behind our disbelief. But I only nodded. There are some lessons a mother cannot force her child to learn. They have to ache into understanding on their own. What surprised me most was how quickly the story changed once Lila was gone. At church, whispers followed me down the aisle, not pity this time, but curiosity. Some people avoided my eyes. Others studied me openly, as if reassessing a painting they'd already decided was finished. I realized then that Lila hadn't just tried to take my home. She had planted doubt. And doubt is a stubborn weed. One afternoon, I received a call from a woman I didn't recognize. Her voice was polite, professional. Mrs. Harper, she said, this is Evelyn Morris from the county. We received a concern regarding your well-being and living situation. Concern. That word again. My heart sank, but I kept my voice steady. Yes? We'd like to schedule a follow-up visit. After I hung up, I sat very still at the kitchen table, my hands folded, just as they'd been the morning Lila served me that tea. So she hadn't stopped. Even after being exposed, she'd made sure to leave a trail behind her breadcrumbs of suspicion that others would follow. The visit came 2 days later. Evelyn was kind but thorough. She asked questions, took notes, looked around the house with a careful eye. "I understand your niece was living with you," she said. "Yes," I replied, briefly, and she expressed concerns about your capacity to manage independently. I smiled faintly. Of course she did. I handed her copies of my evaluations, my documentation, my lawyer's letters. I watched her posture change as she read subtle but unmistakable, the shift from doubt to clarity. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "It appears the concern was unfounded." Unfounded. Such a small word for something that could have ended my life as I knew it. After she left, I locked the door and leaned against it, my knees trembling. Not from fear, but from the weight of how close I'd come. How easily my story could have been rewritten by someone younger, louder, more convincing. That night, I dreamed of my sister. She stood in my living room, just as she used to, arms crossed, eyes sharp with envy she never quite hid. In the dream, she said nothing, just looked around, as if deciding what she might take if given the chance. I woke with a strange sense of sadness, not for myself, but for the bitterness that had passed from her to her daughter like an heirloom no one wanted, but everyone carried. The final blow came a week later. Daniel called me, his voice tight. "Mom, Lila's contesting your will." I closed my eyes. "Of course she was. She claims you were manipulated into changing it," he continued. "That you're not competent." The word landed like a slap. I laughed, then a dry, humorless sound that surprised even me. "She doesn't know when to stop," I said. "The legal process was slow and exhausting. Each letter, each meeting, felt like standing trial for the crime of being old. I was asked to prove myself over and over, to demonstrate clarity, memory, autonomy, as if age itself were evidence against me. But I did it. I showed up. I spoke clearly. I remembered dates, names, details. I told my story without embellishment or apology. And eventually, Lila's case collapsed under the weight of its own lies. The day the judge dismissed it, I walked out of the courthouse alone. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. Old in a way that had nothing to do with my body. That evening, I sat in Harold's old chair, the one Lila had tried to replace, and held his last letter in my hands. I read it slowly, letting each familiar line settle my breathing. I understood something then that took me a lifetime to learn. People don't always try to take your place because they hate you. Sometimes they do it because they want your ending, your stability, your peace, the proof that surviving is possible. But what Lila never understood, what no one ever understands until it's too late, is that a life isn't something you can steal. It's something you have to live. And I had no intention of letting anyone finish mine for me. The house taught me how to breathe again. At first, it was in small ways, the creak of the floorboards sounding familiar instead of accusing. The way sunlight returned to the kitchen in the afternoons, warm and forgiving. I stopped flinching when the phone rang. I slept through the night without listening for footsteps that didn't belong to me. Slowly, I began to inhabit my own body again, not as something fragile to be managed, but as a home I still lived inside. Daniel came by every Sunday after that, not hovering anymore, just present. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. One afternoon, as we sat quietly on the porch, he said, "I should have trusted you." "Yes," I replied, "you should have." He nodded, accepting the truth without defense. That was how I knew he'd finally learned it. Weeks passed, then months. Lila faded into a name spoken less and less, like a word that loses its meaning when it's no longer used. The legal letters stopped coming. The phone stayed quiet. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. One evening, close to winter, I received a handwritten letter. No return address. The handwriting was familiar, tight, slanted, impatient. It was from Lila. She didn't apologize. Not really. She wrote about hardship, about being misunderstood, about how everyone always chose me. She said I'd won, as if life were a competition and not a series of choices that echo long after they're made. At the end, she wrote, "I hope you're happy, sitting alone in that big house." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the fire. I watched the words curl and darken and disappear, because here was the truth she never understood. I wasn't alone. I had myself, and that had always been enough. The real shock came later, when I was cleaning out the hall closet and found an old photo album I hadn't opened in years. Inside was a picture of my sister and me as girls, standing in front of our childhood home. We were holding hands, smiling the same smile. I sat on the floor for a long time, studying our faces, wondering where the divide began, wondering how love curdles into resentment when it's fed silence instead of truth. I didn't excuse what Lila had done, but I finally understood it. She hadn't tried to take my place because I was weak. She tried because she believed survival was a limited resource, that if I had peace, there wasn't enough left for her. That belief destroys families, quietly, efficiently. So I made a decision. I rewrote my will again, not out of fear, but clarity. I left instructions, boundaries, truth in ink. I included a letter not just for Daniel, but for anyone who might ever question my life again. In it, I wrote, "I was here. I was aware. I chose this. I sealed it and put it away." On my 73rd birthday, I hosted a small gathering, just friends, laughter, food that took all day to cook. I stood in the living room, my living room, and looked around at the faces I'd let back into my life. I realized then that Lila had failed in the most important way. She tried to replace me, but she never understood me. You can't take someone's place when you don't know the weight of the years that shaped it. You can't wear a life you never lived. Late that night, after everyone left, I sat alone in Harold's chair and whispered, "I'm still here." The house seemed to answer back. I don't tell this story because I want pity. I tell it because old women are not invisible. We are not confused relics waiting to be managed. We are archives of love, pain, resilience, and truth. And when someone tries to take our place, what they're really saying is that they don't believe we've earned it. I earned every inch of this life, and I will stand in it until the very end. The strange thing about endings is that they don't arrive with trumpets or certainty. They come quietly, disguised as ordinary days, and only later do you realize something has closed behind you for good. It was early spring when I felt it, that final settling. The kind that doesn't announce itself as victory or relief, but as belonging. I was standing at the kitchen sink, washing a single teacup, when I noticed my reflection in the window. Not the woman Lila tried to describe, not fragile, not confused, just older, lived in, still standing. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to prove it to anyone. The neighborhood changed slowly after that. New families moved in. Children rode bicycles past my house, their laughter bright and careless. Some waved, some didn't. Life went on, unconcerned with what nearly happened to me. And that, I learned, was part of healing, accepting that survival doesn't always earn an audience. Every now and then someone would ask about Lila. Family, I'd say, and leave it at that. Because I refused to let her define the final chapter of my life, Daniel started calling more, not out of obligation but habit. Sometimes he'd ask my advice about work, about his marriage, about decisions he used to think I was too old to understand. Each question felt like a quiet apology. Each conversation stitched something back together. One afternoon, he brought his daughter with him. She sat on the floor flipping through old photo albums, her small fingers tracing faces long gone. "Who's that?" she asked, pointing to a picture of me and Harold dancing in the living room decades ago. "That," I said, smiling, "was a very happy woman." She looked up at me, serious. "You still are. Children see what adults complicate." As time passed, I began speaking up more, not loudly, not dramatically, just firmly. At the doctor's office, at the bank, at church meetings. I corrected people when they spoke over me. I took my time answering questions without rushing to sound capable, because capability doesn't need to hurry. Once, a woman at church leaned in and whispered, "It must have been so frightening what your niece tried to do." "It was," I said. "But what frightened me more was how easy it was for people to believe her." She nodded slowly, understanding settling in her eyes. That's why I started telling my story not as a warning soaked in fear, but as a reminder soaked in truth. I told other women my age to document their lives, to speak clearly, to trust their instincts even when the world insists they're expired. I told them that kindness without boundaries invites danger, and that love does not require surrender. Some listened, some smiled politely and changed the subject. But a few, just a few, held my hand a little tighter afterward, and that was enough. I never heard from Lila again. Not directly. I heard rumors, of course, struggles, bitterness, stories that always placed her at the center of injustice. I felt no satisfaction in them, only a quiet certainty that she was still running from the same emptiness that made her believe my life was something she could wear like a coat. I wished her peace from a distance, but I did not invite her back into my story. On the anniversary of Harold's death, I lit a candle and sat alone in the living room, I told him everything, how close I came to losing it all, how I found my spine again, how I learned that survival sometimes looks like paperwork and patience instead of bravery and fire. I didn't disappear, I whispered. I stayed. The flame flickered gently, steady. If there is a lesson in all this one worth leaving behind, it's this. A place in the world is not given by youth or volume or ambition. It is earned by endurance, by staying present when life tries to erase you, by refusing to step aside just because someone else is tired of waiting their turn. I did not lose my place. I defended it. And now, when I sit in my chair at night, listening to the house breathe around me, I feel something deeper than safety. I feel rooted. This is my home. This is my life. And no one, no matter how close they stand, gets to take my place again. There is a kind of silence that feels earned, not the empty hush that once followed me from room to room after Harold died, and not the tense quiet I lived in while Lila measured my life for herself, but a gentler one. A silence that doesn't demand anything from you, that lets you be exactly who you are without explanation. That is the silence I live with now. Some mornings I wake before the sun and sit at the kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, watching the sky change its mind about the day. I move slower than I used to. I forget where I set my glasses sometimes. I repeat stories, all the ordinary things that come with time, and yet there is nothing fragile about me, nothing missing. Age did not empty me, it filled me. I think often about how close I came to being erased without ever leaving my chair. No dramatic struggle, no raised voices, just paperwork, whispers, and the dangerous assumption that an old woman's truth is negotiable. If I hadn't listened to the quiet alarm inside me, if I had dismissed it the way so many people wanted me to, I would have disappeared politely, legally, with everyone believing it was for my own good. That thought still chills me. And yet, I don't live in fear of it anymore, because I know now that my voice didn't weaken with age. It simply learned restraint. It learned when to wait, when to document, when to speak so clearly that no one could mistake it for confusion. I've made peace with the fact that some people will always believe youth before experience, confidence before truth. I no longer chase their understanding. I don't soften my words to make others comfortable. Comfort is a luxury, not a requirement. What matters is this: I am awake inside my own life. Every so often, I walk through the house and touch the door frames the way I did after Lila left. Not to reassure myself anymore, but to remember. This place has held me through joy and grief, through betrayal and resilience. It knows my footsteps. It knows my pauses. It knows the sound of my breathing when I think no one is listening. I've stopped apologizing for taking up space. When I speak at church now, I speak slowly, deliberately. I let silence fall if it needs to. People listen differently when you refuse to rush your worth. I see it in their faces the moment they realize I am not someone to be managed, but someone to be heard. That realization feels like justice. Daniel told me recently that my story changed how he sees aging. He said, "I used to think getting old meant losing things, control, independence, relevance. And now?" I asked. "Now I think it means knowing what can't be taken." I smiled at that, because he was right. What Leela never understood, what many never understand, is that my place was never just a house or a role or a set of routines. My place was built from every choice I made when no one was watching, from endurance, from love, from staying. You cannot steal that. You cannot imitate a life shaped by decades of showing up. You cannot replace someone whose roots run deeper than convenience. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine Lila somewhere else, standing in a different house, looking for a place to settle into. I don't know if she ever found it. I hope she did. But I also know this. Until she learns that a life must be lived, not occupied, she will always feel like a guest in someone else's story. As for me, I no longer worry about being replaced. I worry only about staying honest with myself. I keep my documents in order. I keep my friendships alive. I keep my mind engaged. Not because I'm afraid, but because I respect myself enough to remain visible. That is the final lesson I leave behind. We do not age out of our right to exist fully. We do not fade because someone else is impatient. We do not lose our place simply because another person wants it. And if anyone ever tries to speak over me, to decide for me, to quietly step into the space I earned, I know exactly what I will do. I will stand, I will speak, I will document, I will remain. Because this life, every line, every wrinkle, every memory belongs to me, and I am not finished with it yet. There are moments now quiet, unremarkable moments when I realize how narrowly I escaped becoming a footnote in my own life. It happens when I'm standing in the grocery aisle, choosing apples, or when I'm balancing my checkbook at the dining table, the numbers lining up neatly beneath my pen, or when I laugh at something foolish on the television and hear the sound echo back to me, unfiltered, uncorrected, mine. In those moments, a chill passes through me, because I understand how easily all of this could have been labeled unnecessary, unsafe, excessive for someone my age. That is how it happens, you see. Not with cruelty at first, but with concern. Not with theft, but with help. I have learned to be suspicious of help that asks for silence in return. The world treats aging like a slow erasure. Each year, you're expected to surrender something, your keys, your opinions, your authority over your own story. People speak louder around you, then about you, then for you. And if you don't resist, if you don't insist on staying present, you vanish in stages, applauded for how gracefully you stepped aside. Lila didn't invent that system. She just learned how to use it. That truth took time to settle in me. At first, I wanted her to be the villain in a simple story, one bad person removed, danger gone. But life doesn't work that way. She was only the sharp edge of something much larger. A culture that believes age is permission. Permission to decide, permission to override, permission to take. Once I understood that, my anger softened into something steadier resolve. I began writing letters, not to send, but to clarify my own voice. Letters to my younger self. Letters to my sister. Letters to the woman I will be 10 years from now, if I'm granted that time. I wrote about what I endured, yes, but also about what I reclaimed, my authority, my instincts, my refusal to disappear quietly. I wrote about the moment I realized my fear had changed. It no longer asked, "What if I lose everything?" It asked, "What if I don't fight for what's mine?" That question changed me. I no longer tolerate being spoken over. When someone interrupts me now, I pause until they notice the silence they created. Then I continue. When professionals address my son instead of me, I correct them without apology. When people say, "At your age, you shouldn't worry about," I stop them right there. "I'll decide what I worry about," I say. And I do. Some people find this unsettling. I can see it in their expressions, the surprise that an elderly woman has the audacity to remain firm, to remain complicated, to remain herself. But discomfort is not my responsibility. It never was. What surprised me most was how many women quietly thanked me after hearing my story. Women who had signed papers they didn't fully understand. Women whose children spoke about them in the past tense while they were still sitting in the room. Women who sensed something slipping away but didn't yet have the language for it. I gave them my language. I told them, "Document everything. Tell someone you trust. Ask questions even if your voice shakes. Confusion is not the same as disagreement, and age is not incompetence." I told them that dignity doesn't vanish, it is taken, piece by piece, by those who believe they know better. And I told them this most of all: you are allowed to stay. I see Lila now only in passing thoughts. She no longer occupies my dreams. She no longer casts a shadow across my routines. In a strange way, she gave me something, though she never intended to. She reminded me that survival is not passive, that even at this stage of life there are battles worth fighting not with fists, but with clarity. Sometimes I sit in the garden and think about how stories like mine are usually told after the fact, after the woman is gone, after her house is sold, after her voice is reduced to speculation. But I am here, and this is me telling it myself. If someone listens and learns, good. If they doubt me, so be it. I no longer require belief to validate my existence. I have lived long enough to know who I am, and that knowledge is heavier than any accusation. The final truth, the one I carry with me now, like a steady flame, is this: my place was never something someone else could take. It was something I chose to defend, and as long as I am breathing, thinking, remembering, choosing, I will remain exactly where I belong. There is a strange freedom that comes after you stop waiting for permission. I didn't recognize it at first. I mistook it for rest, for the easing of vigilance now that the threat was gone. But it was more than that. It was the realization that I no longer needed to audition for my own life. No explanations, no justifications, no softening of my edges to make others comfortable. I had spent decades being agreeable, generous, understanding. Those qualities once kept families together and doors open, but I learned far too late, Perhaps that the same traits can be used against you when someone decides your kindness is weakness and your patience is vacancy. So I stopped yielding by default. That didn't mean I became hard. It meant I became precise. I chose my yes carefully. I learned to say no without apology, without a paragraph of reasons trailing behind it like a plea for forgiveness. The first time I did it, my voice shook. The second time, less so. By the third, it felt natural, like a muscle rediscovering its purpose. I noticed something else, too. People began treating me differently. Not everyone. Some still leaned in with that particular tilt of the head, the one that says we'll humor her. Others continued to explain things slowly, loudly, as if time itself had damaged my hearing. But a few, just enough to matter, adjusted. They listened. They asked instead of assumed. They waited. Respect. I realized often follows boundaries. I returned to places I'd abandoned during Lila's quiet campaign of isolation: the library, the community center, the small cafe on Maple Street where the owner still remembered my order. Each visit felt like reclaiming a fragment of myself that had been set aside for safekeeping without my consent. One afternoon, as I sat reading near the window, a woman approached me. She hesitated, then said, "You don't know me, but I heard what happened with your niece." I closed my book, met her eyes. "Yes, my daughter's been helping me," she said slowly. "And lately I've felt like I'm shrinking." The word landed between us, heavy with recognition. We talked for nearly an hour. Not about legal strategies or dramatic confrontations, but about the quiet warning signs, the way help can curdle into control, the way love can be used as leverage. When we parted, she squeezed my hand and said, "Thank you for not pretending it was nothing." That's when I understood something else. Survival stories aren't meant to be hidden. They aren't trophies or confessions. They are maps. So I stopped editing my experience to sound nicer, smaller, more palatable. I told it plainly. Without melodrama, without excuses for the people who nearly erased me. I named what happened because naming is a form of protection. There were still moments of grief, of course. Loss doesn't vanish just because you fought it off. I mourned the niece I thought I had. I mourned the version of family I wanted to believe in. I mourned the months I spent doubting myself because it felt safer than doubting her. But grief, like age, is not an enemy. It is evidence that something mattered. On quiet evenings, I sit with that grief and let it speak. It tells me I am still capable of caring deeply, of trusting again selectively, wisely. It reminds me that caution and openness are not opposites, but companions. Sometimes I imagine the path not taken, the one where I signed the papers, smiled politely, and accepted the narrative written for me. In that version, I am thanked for my cooperation, praised for my grace, and slowly edited out of decisions until there is nothing left to decide. That woman frightens me. Not because she is weak, but because she is silenced, and I refuse to become her. So I continue, day by day, intentionally. I plan. I choose. I speak. I take up space without shrinking my voice to match anyone else's expectations of what 73 should look like. If this is my final chapter, then it will not be written by someone else's hand. It will not be neat or quiet or convenient. It will be honest. And when the time does come when I finally leave this house, this chair, this well-worn life behind, I want it said not that I faded, or was protected, or was managed. I want it said that I remained. That I noticed when the world tried to move me aside. That I stood my ground without shouting. That I defended my place not out of pride, but out of truth. Because a life is not a position someone else can fill. It is a presence, and mine unapologetic, aware,